The Gita and Satyagraha. The philosophy of nonviolence. I have admitted in my introduction to the Gita known as Anasakti Yoga that it is not a treatise on nonviolence, nor was it written to condemn war. Hinduism, as it is practiced today or has even been known to have ever been practiced, has certainly not condemned war as I do. What, however, I have done is to put a new but natural and logical interpretation upon the whole teaching of the Gita and the spirit of Hinduism. Hinduism, not to speak of other religions, is ever evolving. It has no one scripture like the Quran or the Bible. Its scriptures are also evolving and suffering addition. The Gita itself is an instance in point. It has given a new meaning to karma, sannyasa, yajna, etc. It has breathed new life into Hinduism. It has given an original rule of conduct. Not that what the Gita has given was not implied in the previous writings, but the Gita put these implications in a concrete shape. I have endeavored, in the light of a prayerful study of the other faiths of the world, and what is more, in the light of my own experiences in trying to live the teaching of Hinduism as interpreted in the Gita, to give an extended but in no way strained meaning to Hinduism, not as buried in its ample scriptures, but as a living faith speaking like a mother to her aching child. What I have done is perfectly historical. I have followed in the footsteps of our forefathers. At one time they sacrificed animals to propitiate angry gods. Their descendants, but our less remote ancestors, read a different meaning into the word sacrifice, and they taught that sacrifice was meant to be of our baser self, to please not angry gods but the one living God within. I hold that the logical outcome of the teaching of the Gita is decidedly for peace at the price of life itself. It is the highest aspiration of the human species. The Mahabharata and Ramayana, the two books that millions of Hindus know and regard as their guides, are undoubtedly allegories as the internal evidence shows. That they most probably deal with historical figures does not affect my proposition. Each epic describes the eternal duel that goes on between the forces of darkness and of light. Anyway, I must disclaim any intention of straining the meaning of Hinduism or the Gita to suit any preconceived notions of mine. My notions were an outcome of a study of the Gita, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Upanishads, etc. Harijan, October 3, 1936. Truth 1. The word satya, truth, is derived from sat, which means being. And nothing is or exists in reality except truth. That is why Sat or truth is perhaps the most important name of God. In fact, it is more correct to say that truth is God, than to say that God is truth. But as we cannot do without a ruler or a general, names of God such as King of Kings or the Almighty are and will remain more usually current. On deeper thinking, however, it will be realized that Sat or Satya is the only correct and fully significant name of God. And where there is truth, there also is knowledge, pure knowledge. Where there is no truth, there can be no true knowledge. That is why the word chit or knowledge is associated with the name of God. And where there is true knowledge, there is always bliss, ananda. Sorrow has no place there. And even as truth is eternal, so is the bliss derived from it. Hence we know God as Satchit Ananda, one who combined in himself truth, knowledge, and bliss. Devotion to this truth is the sole reason for our existence. All our activities should be centered in truth. Truth should be the very breath of our life. When once this stage in the pilgrim's progress is reached, all other rules of correct living will come without effort, and obedience to them will be instinctive. But without truth it would be impossible to observe any principles or rules in life. Generally speaking, observing the law of truth is merely understood to mean that we must speak the truth. But we in the ashram understand the word satya or truth in a much wider sense. There should be truth in thought, truth in speech, and truth in action. To the man who has realized this truth in perfection, nothing else remains to be known, because all knowledge is necessarily included in it. What is not included in it is not truth, and so not true knowledge, and there can be no inward peace without true knowledge. If once we learn how to apply this never-failing test of truth, we will at once be able to find out what is worth doing, what is worth seeing, what is worth reading. But how is one to realize this truth, which may be likened to the philosopher's stone or the cow of plenty? By single-minded devotion, abhyasa, and indifference to every other interest in life, vairagya, replies the Bhagavad Gita. In spite, however, of such devotion, what may appear as truth to one person will often appear as untruth to another person. But that need not worry the seeker. Where there is honest effort, it will be realized that what appear to be different truths are like apparently different countless leaves of the same tree. Does not God himself appear to different individuals in different aspects? Still we know that he is one. But truth is the right designation of God. Hence there is nothing wrong in every one following truth according to one's lights. Indeed it is one's duty to do so. Then if there is a mistake on the part of anyone so following truth, it will be automatically set right. For the quest of truth involves tapas, self-suffering, sometimes even unto death. There can be no place in it for even a trace of self-interest. In such selfless search for truth nobody can lose his bearings for long. Directly one takes to the wrong path one stumbles, and is thus redirected to the right path. Therefore the pursuit of truth is true bhakti, devotion. It is the path that leads to God, and therefore there is no place in it for cowardice, no place for defeat. It is the talisman by which death itself becomes the portal of life eternal. Non-possession or poverty. Civilization, in the real sense of the term, consists not in the multiplication, but in the deliberate and voluntary reduction of wants. This alone promotes real happiness and contentment, and increases the capacity for service. From the standpoint of pure truth, the body too is a possession. It has been truly said, that desire for enjoyment creates bodies for the soul. When this desire vanishes, there remains no further need for the body, and man is free from the vicious cycle of births and deaths. The soul is omnipresent. Why should she care to be confined within the cage-like body, or do evil and even kill for the sake of the cage? We thus arrive at the ideal of total renunciation, and learn to use the body for the purposes of service so long as it exists, so much so that service, and not bread, becomes with us the staff of life. We eat and drink, sleep and awake, for service alone. Such an attitude of mind brings us real happiness, and the beatific vision in the fullness of time. Let us examine ourselves from this standpoint. We should remember that non-possession is a principle applicable to thoughts, as well as to things. One who fills his brain with useless knowledge, violates that inestimable principle. Thoughts, which turn us away from God, or do not turn us towards Him, constitute impediments in our way. In this connection we may consider the definition of knowledge contained in the 13th chapter of the Gita. We are there told, that humility, amanitvam, etc. constitute knowledge, and all the rest is ignorance. If this is true, and there is no doubt that it is true, much that we hug today as knowledge is ignorance pure and simple, and therefore, only does us harm, instead of conferring any benefit. It makes the mind wander, and even reduces it to a vacuity, and discontent flourishes in endless ramifications of evil. Needless to say, this is not a plea for inertia. Every moment of our life should be filled with activity, but that activity should be sattvika, tending to truth. One who has consecrated his life to service cannot be idle for a single moment. But one has to learn to distinguish between good activity and evil activity. This discernment goes naturally with a single-minded devotion to service. Fearlessness. Every reader of the Gita knows that fearlessness heads the list of the divine attributes enumerated in the 16th chapter. Whether this is merely due to the exigencies of meter, or whether the pride of place has been deliberately yielded to fearlessness, is more than I can say. In my opinion, however, fearlessness richly deserves the first rank assigned to it there. For it is a sine qua non for the growth of the other noble qualities. How can one seek truth, or cherish love, without fearlessness? As Pritam has it, the path of Hari, the Lord, is the path of the brave, not of cowards. Hari here means truth, and the brave are those armed with fearlessness, not with the sword, the rifle, and other carnal weapons, which, strictly speaking, are affected only by cowards. Fearlessness connotes freedom from all external fear, fear of disease, bodily injury, and death, of dispossession, of losing one's nearest and dearest, of losing reputation or giving offense, and so on. One who overcomes the fear of death does not surmount all other fears, as is commonly but erroneously supposed. Some of us do not fear death, but flee from the minor ills of life. Some are ready to die themselves, but cannot bear their loved ones to be taken away from them. Some misers will put up with all this, will part even with their lives, but not their property. Others will do any number of black deeds in order to uphold their supposed prestige. Some will swerve from the straight and narrow path, which lies clear before them, simply because they are afraid of incurring the world's odium. The seeker after truth must conquer all these fears. He should be ready to sacrifice his all in the quest of truth, even as Harishchandra did. The story of Harishchandra may be only a parable, but every seeker will bear witness to its truth from his personal experience, and therefore that story is more precious than any historical fact. Perfect fearlessness can be attained only by him who has realized the Supreme, as it implies freedom from delusions. One can always progress towards this goal by determined and constant endeavor, and by cultivating self-confidence. As I have stated at the very outset, we must give up all external fears. But the internal foes we must always fear. We are rightly afraid of animal passion, anger, and the like. External fears cease of their own accord, when once we have conquered these traitors within the camp. All fears revolve round the body as the center, and would therefore disappear, as soon as one got rid of attachment for the body. We thus find that all fear is the baseless fabric of our own vision. Fear has no place in our hearts, when we have shaken off the attachment for wealth, for family, and for the body. Enjoy the things of the earth by renouncing them, is a noble precept. Wealth, family, and body will be there, just the same, we have only to change our attitude towards them. All these are not ours, but God's. Nothing whatever in this world is ours. Even we ourselves are His. Why, then, should we entertain any fears? The Upanishad therefore directs us to give up attachment for things, while we enjoy them. That is to say, we must be interested in them, not as proprietors, but as only trustees. He, on whose behalf we hold them, will give us the strength and the weapons requisite for defending them against all usurpers. When we thus cease to be masters and reduce ourselves to the rank of servants, humbler than the very dust under our feet, all fears will roll away like mists, we shall attain ineffable peace, and see Satyanarayana, the God of truth, face to face. Tolerance. I did not like this word, but could not think of a better one. Tolerance implies a gratuitous assumption of the inferiority of other faiths to one's own, whereas ahimsa teaches us to entertain the same respect for the religious faiths of others as we accord to our own, thus admitting the imperfection of the latter. This admission will be readily made by a seeker of truth, who follows the law of love. If we had attained the full vision of truth, we would no longer be mere seekers, but become one with God, for truth is God. But being only seekers, we prosecute our quest, and are conscious of our imperfection. And if we are imperfect ourselves, religion as conceived by us must also be imperfect. We have not realized religion as in its perfection, even as we have not realized God. Religion of our conception, being thus imperfect, is always subject to a process of evolution and reinterpretation. Progress towards truth, towards God, is possible only because of such evolution. And if all faiths outlined by men are imperfect, the question of comparative merit does not arise. All faiths constitute a revelation of truth, but all are imperfect, and liable to error. Reverence for other faiths need not blind us to their faults. We must be keenly alive to the defects of our own faith, and must not leave it on that account, but try to overcome those defects. Looking at all religions with an equal eye, we would not only not hesitate, but would think it our duty, to adopt into our faith every acceptable feature of other faiths. The question then arises, why should there be so many different faiths? The soul is one, but the bodies which she animates are many. We cannot reduce the number of bodies, yet we recognize the unity of the soul. Even as a tree has a single trunk, but many branches and leaves, so is there one true and perfect religion, but it becomes many, as it passes through the human medium. The one religion is beyond all speech. Imperfect men put it into such language as they can command, and their words are interpreted by other men equally imperfect, whose interpretation is to be held to be the right one. Everyone is right from his own standpoint, but it is not impossible that everyone is wrong. Hence the necessity for tolerance, which does not mean indifference towards one's own faith but a more intelligent and purer love for it. Tolerance gives us spiritual insight, which is as far from fanaticism as the North Pole is from the South. True knowledge of religion breaks down the barriers between faith and faith. Cultivation of tolerance for other faiths will impart to us a truer understanding of our own. Tolerance obviously does not disturb the distinction between right and wrong, or good and evil. The reference here throughout is naturally to the principal faiths of the world. They are all based on common fundamentals. They have all produced saintly men and women. Humility. Humility cannot be an observance by itself, for it does not lend itself to being practiced. It is, however, an indispensable test of ahimsa. In one who has ahimsa in him, it becomes part of his very nature. But although humility is not one of the observances, it certainly is essential as, and perhaps even more essential than, any one of them. Only it never came to anyone by practice. Truth can be cultivated, as well as love. But to cultivate humility is tantamount to cultivating hypocrisy. Humility must not be here confounded with mere manners or etiquette. One man will sometimes prostrate himself before another, although his heart is full of bitterness against the latter. This is not humility, but cunning. A man may repeat Ramanama, or tell his beads all day long, and move in society like a sage. But if he is selfish at heart, he is not meek, but only hypocritical. A humble person is not himself conscious of his humility. Truth and the like perhaps admit of measurement, but not humility. Inborn humility can never remain hidden, and yet the possessor is unaware of its existence. The story of Vasistha and Vishvamitra furnishes a very good case in point. Humility should make the possessor realize that he is as nothing. Directly one imagines oneself to be something, there is egotism. If a man who keeps observances is proud of keeping them, they will lose much, if not all of their values. And a man who is proud of his virtue often becomes a curse to society. Society will not appreciate it, and he himself will fail to reap any benefit out of it. Only a little thought will suffice to convince us that all creatures are nothing more than a mere atom in this universe. Our existence as embodied beings is purely momentary. What are 100 years in eternity? But if we shatter the chains of egotism, and are melted in the ocean of humanity, we share its dignity. To feel that we are something is to set up a barrier between God and ourselves. To cease feeling that we are something is to become one with God. A drop in the ocean partakes of the greatness of its parent, although it is unconscious of it. But it is dried up, as soon as it enters upon an existence independent of the ocean. We do not exaggerate when we say that life is a mere bubble. A life of service must be one of humility. One who would sacrifice his life for others has hardly time to reserve for himself a place in the sun. Inertia must not be mistaken for humility, as it has been in Hinduism. True humility means most strenuous and constant endeavor entirely directed to the service of humanity. God is performing continuous action without resting for a single moment. If we would serve Him or become one with Him, our activity must be as unwearied as His. There may be rest in store for the drop which is separated from the ocean, but not for the drop in the ocean, which knows no rest. The same is the case with ourselves. As soon as we become one with the ocean in the shape of God, there is no more rest for us, nor indeed do we need rest any longer. Our very sleep is action. For we sleep with the thought of God in our hearts. This restlessness constitutes true rest. This never-ceasing agitation holds the key to peace ineffable. This supreme state of total surrender is difficult to describe, but not beyond the bounds of human experience.